Then God said to Noah and to his sons with me, as for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as come out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and with every living creature that is with you for all generations. I've set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." This is the word of the Lord. So our meditation for today is cultivating, and these are some of my red wiggler friends that I will be talking about from previous years. I do this every season, and I have this book over here, Up and Down in the Garden and in the Dirt, which I love. This is a lovely children's book that I get some inspiration from. So we can go out of screen share and let's reflect together. So you may know I love worm composting. I suppose you know this by now. In fact, for a few years now, every time at this year, worm composting becomes my primary spiritual practice. It's a little hard in the summer because it's too hot. In the depths of the winter, it's a little too cold, but right now is the perfect time to start. Worm composting has taught me to attune my attention to what is going on underneath the soil, and then more broadly, what essential elements of life are happening all around us just below the surface. Or, particular for this year, just behind the screen, right? So center on stage are these lovely red wriggler worms, which I actually order every year online. But I have to tell you, there was a shipping mistake this year, which I'm really, really disappointed to. So I did get worms, but these are live mealworms, which is not the kind you want. These are the kind that actually turn into maggots. So don't use this kind. This is the kind that you feed to your frog or something. So I said, "No, you sent the wrong one." They said, "It's fine, keep it, and we'll send you another one." But the snow has delayed their replacement. So I know it's very, very sad to me. Anyway, the actual red wriggler worms that you saw on your screen will be coming in the next coming weeks. But today we're going to set up their home. What I love about these little guys is they break down the food scraps and other organic material, and they leave their worm casings or worm poop. Yes, I said poop, behind into what gardeners call black gold, priceless material that enhances soil fertility, enabling the plants to absorb more nutrients into the soil so they can grow fast and healthy. In the e-blast this week, it was a snow day for my son, so we made an unboxing video. You might have seen unboxing videos on Instagram, so we wanted to make our own. And in just a moment, if you see the other CPC screen, CPC Compost Station, we're going to be setting up their home in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about why on earth are we talking about worm composting other than I love it, and on Lent. So for this Lent, as I've said a couple of times, I've been trying to repeat it so that you hear me. We are talking about food and faith. Food, as we all know, is central to life and central to who Clarendon Presbyterian is. And many of us have discovered, especially in these longest pandemic times, that active faith does not shy away from questions or even doubt. And that all of that wrapped up is central to life as well. So this Lent, we're exploring how food in all of its forms can center and cultivate a deep rootedness in the posture of worship and gratitude towards God, our Creator, who is steadfast in God's own covenant to the earth. In the scripture from Genesis today, we heard about God setting the bow or the rainbow in the sky as a sign to Noah and all of their ancestors of God's everlasting covenant. On Wednesday, this past Wednesday for Ash Wednesday, we also meditated on God's covenant promise. Reverend Blair read those wonderful words of hope and endurance from Isaiah 58. So here's verse 11 and 12 again. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. God's covenant extends from Noah to Abraham and Sarah. Remember when they were looking at all those stars? Through all of the prophets to Jesus the Christ as God's new covenant for the earth. God's witness that God will never forsake us and that God has promised to always call each and every one of us God's own, God's beloved. And God in this covenant promises that we are so intricately connected, even when sometimes we feel so far apart. We are not alone and thereby called into community to be repairers of the breach, called to be good stewards of the earth. And strange as it may seem, the little red wriggler friends, which you can imagine being in this bag, not the live mealworms, teach me lessons about God's continual work in the world. So when I am preparing for this process and when I really get into it, every time I cook, and honestly, we've been cooking a lot now, at least I have, rather than throwing away my veggie and fruit scraps, I'm attentive to all the extra little bits, carefully saving them in jars and whatever other containers I have for the worms. We have a lot of takeout containers at this point. Doesn't this kind of look like a parfait? Can you see it? So we have some eggshells, coffee grounds, like that's the most of the parfait. I drink a lot of coffee. Some leftover strawberry stems and some leftover cauliflower that kind of forgot about in the fridge. And once the compost bin is all set in, all the things, I love watching these little guys crawl about. I could just watch them for hours. I'm amazed by the speed which they multiply and consume. And I'm amazed about what they take many of us consider to be trash, and they turn it into valuable nutrients, compost, as the basis for life. God takes what we perceive as used up and no longer useful, and with energy and with love, God breathes in new life, creating something new. This is what God does all over the Bible. From the Noah story, God creates new life out of destruction. For Sarah and Abraham, life out of barrenness. For the people in bondage in Egypt, freedom when many of them knew only chains. And this is what God is doing right now with us, even in the longest of Februaries with these ice storms, with the trauma we've been hearing about in Texas, most of us still largely locked in at home. We continue to hear this promise that there is nothing that can separate us from God's love for us. Maybe every time we see the rainbow, either in the sky or one of our pride flags, we can remember that love, that God is always creating new life, especially in ways we don't expect, in ways that are underneath, that are rising to the surface, that are coming to life. This season of Lent, I invite you to cultivate that attention to where God is bringing life out of places of pain and trauma and destruction in the world. Where do you see God creating life out of death? My hope is that by saying yes to this invitation to cultivate an attuneness to what is going on in the world, where God is bringing life out of death, together we may cultivate a faith so deep that we feel it in our bones and our souls, a faith that calls us out of the depths of these times, a faith that inspires and cultivates a new way of being. So in a moment, we're going to have time for community discussion and reflection again, like we did last week. And you will have a few choices of questions. 2 of these are, what is God cultivating in you this season? And what is God cultivating in the church? But as you think on this question, we're going to switch screens for a moment. We're going to set up the worm bin. So travel with me to the other side of my office. It should only take a moment. The commute is short. Did it work? I'm back. It was like the fastest commute ever. Surprise! Okay, so here we are, and this is what I look like standing up. Hi! So here we are with the worm bin, which I'm really excited about. I got a new one for us this year. It'll live in my office. Hopefully it won't get stinky. If it gets stinky, I'll bring it home. Or before you all come back in here and you can tell it it's getting stinky. There is a little lever at the bottom here to let out the worm tea, which is the extra bits of worm casings and stuff that goes through. And then there's a couple of trays. We just start with one tray. And inside, this is the worm ladder. Did you know that worms need a ladder? Who knew? Because they kind of get stuck at the bottom sometimes. While worms are lovely, they're probably not the smartest of creatures, so they get stuck, so they need help. But you know, we get stuck too. We need help. And then there are a bunch of extra trays, and this is when we really get going. And this is the lid, which hopefully has instructions on the top, so we can follow along. Inside it says to put a couple of sheets of newspaper on the bottom. I actually lined it up with the impeachment trial, just because it was available. It wasn't not necessarily a political statement, but I thought it'd be fun. And then this is peat moss in here. I have added a couple of cups of water to make it loose. It comes in a brick like this. Then from there, we add some shredded newspaper. Pre-shredded, because you know on Zoom, who wants to wait for me to shred the newspaper, right? And then we add a little bit of pumice. You know, the worms want a nice home. Don't you want a nice home? They want us to decorate. So that is the picture frame. And then we add a little bit of rock dust. I don't recommend giving this to your 2-year-old and having them sprinkle this around your living room, just as a recommendation. It does come up fairly quickly in the vacuum cleaner. Sprinkle a little bit of that in. Who knew you were going to have a worm cooking video today? Then we stir it all up. This could be like one of those videos where there's the time lapse, but unfortunately there's no time lapse. You just get to be with me, so thank you. And then we pour it in. Hopefully not the rock dust everywhere. My hope is, I don't know if you know, but the 2-year-old preschool class is in the Sunday school rooms right next to us right now. My daughter is actually in, so I'm in that pod. So my hope is that they'll come in here and maybe they'll be able to stir the compost. We'll be able to read a book and, you know, get the church a little bit more connected to the preschool. This looks pretty good. And then after that, they say to, you know, put your compost in. You know, we want an even mix of browns and greens. So browns are like leaves or newspaper scraps. If you're doing leaves, so one year I just dumped a bunch of leaves in. They get all stuck together, so you have to kind of shred them, unfortunately. So here are some more of that cauliflower, more eggs. We have an egg delivery, so we eat a lot of eggs. At one point, it was all we were eating. More eggs. Oh, it's nice and stinky. It's been in my kitchen for like a week. And more. But I guess if you put it in a brown bananas. And unfortunately, there are no worms today except for the maggot worms, which I am not introducing to Clarendon. You're welcome. So then you stir it all up. And then you can imagine putting the worms on top. The other thing that they say to do so those worms don't escape is to wet some newspaper and then put it right on top. We're not going to do that right now because it'll take too long, but I think I might make another video about this during the week because I'm really excited about these worms. And then we put the lid on, assuming that the worms are in there because we don't want them to escape. Because what you probably didn't want to introduce to the church was these creepy crawly worms everywhere. But I'm super excited about this. I see life coming out of death. I see hope. And then this can go into our garden for the plot against hunger, our home gardens. This is an investment into the future. And that is what as a church we are about. And doing something radical and crazy and new. We are going to go into discussion groups. Thanks for your excitement, Tony. And Travis, you can take yourself off mute. I have some instructional things that we'll put up. We'll put the slides back. So give us just a second, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah.
Ta-da! I made it back. The commute is so short these days. So our discussion leaders are Travis, Anna, myself, and Clark. If you are on YouTube with us, we really appreciate you being with us, but we're going to turn off the YouTube recording at this right after I talk about the discussions. You're welcome to come on over on Zoom and join us. So you have two sets of questions. Where do we see God creating life out of the destructive things of the world? Or where do you feel God, what do you feel that God is cultivating in you? And what do you feel that God is cultivating in the church? Our discussion leaders are going to help us moderate. Before you speak, if you would introduce yourself with your name only. I love the long stories. I love hearing about you, but we're only going to stay in these rooms for about 7 minutes. So we're just going to start with our names. And then if you would answer briefly and honestly, so that everyone who wants may speak. You are not required to speak. No one is required to speak, but we would love you to. And when others are speaking, if you keep yourself on mute. And other than the moderator, we're going to try not to jump in on people while they're reflecting because it's hard to interrupt each other on Zoom. Because while in person we can both talk, on Zoom we can't. Travis, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah. Alice, because of Zoom, you need to assign yourself or join room 3, and I will join room 4.
Oh, perfect. So I am going to stop our live stream.